Large gang, let's go. I'm a hard man. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the state of the world after 1918. So I did a geopolitical analysis of World War I and the beginning of the 20th century. I want to move on now past that point, the Great War, and talk about some of the aspects of stuff that happened after the First World War. So I will be going into the interwar period. I may go back a little bit further in history and do some geopolitical analysis before the 20th century, but right now I'm just gonna do modern times. So the First World War is the conflict, I think, that sets up the current world crisis, you could say, because it's the war in which both communism and fascism and Islamic fundamentalism actually derive from. These kind of mass people ideologies, populist ideologies, where the mass of the people are motivated and kind of guided into a mass hysteria and the like, in sort of almost a religious hysteria. I think a lot of that originates from the beginning of the 20th century with World War I. And even before that, with the American Civil War and the two Boer Wars, the Anglo-Boer Wars, that definitely also was important. But all of that was finally solidified in the industrial killing fields of the First World War. So what happens after 1918? Well, I think the biggest international event is the rise of the Third Internationale and communism in Russia. So Russia was ruled by the Tsar, but in 1917 the Tsar abdicated and a provisional government was set up in the Russian Empire. It became the Russian Republic. So the 200 years of the rule of the Tsars, from Peter the Great, and even really further back, really a history that went all the way back to the Vikings, to Novgorod, to Kievan Rus, a history that went all the way back down to Nicholas II. That was gone. Russia became a republic, actually. But in less than a year, in 1917, events moved pretty swiftly in Russia in 1917. The masses of people were very easily motivated and driven into mass hysteria, into mass hysterical insanity, really. You could say that people were drunken with revolution. So 1917 was all about revolution. And there was a lot of Freemasonic influences that were afoot in this event. Lots of Freemasonic influences. So, we cannot underscore the impact of the Bolshevik takeover in Petrograd in the October Revolution. Hey, what's up, 3-4? Warhammer, let's go! I'm Arch Warhammer! I'm gonna fight you! Let's get it. Let's go, boy. This is Forge Gang. What's up, buddy? But yeah, man, dude, 3-4, you drank a lot of beers. You look, by the end of your stream, you actually kind of looked a little bit, like you were about to fall out there. I think you might have drank a little bit too much. I should have told you to chug those beers down, buddy. I hope you're all right, man. But hey, you'll get out. You'll recover. You'll recover. But yeah, in America, 3-4, we chug our beer. It's a very strong American tradition. Americans love their beer. I mean, well, actually, pretty much all Western countries love their beer. All right, so I drank 6 beers and some wines, drank a bit fast. Yeah, you were looking like you were about to actually puke all of that out. Like, I mean, you kind of, it looked like by the time that Euros got on the stream, it looked like you had finally successfully got that down. But before that, it looked like you were about to puke. And like, I was worried about you. You know, I was worried about that happening to you. You know, I was kind of concerned about it, like, oh no, I told him to chug that down, and it looks like he took my advice too harshly, or too sudden. So you drank 6 beers and wine. I don't know how much wine you drank, but you know, wine doesn't fuzz up in your stomach like beer does. I've always was able to drink wine easier than I did beer. But wine gets me drunker than beer does. I really miss drinking. I really do miss drinking. But yeah. Alright, so I think the biggest consequence about World War I was the Russian Revolution and the rise of communism, the communist movement, which will be very impactful on the world stage after the demise of colonialism. For a long time, communism is only settled in northern Eurasia. It does spread to Hungary and to China, but it's only after World War II that it really gets into, like, Africa, former Asian colonies, Latin America, etc., etc. But the Russian provisional government is very weak and very ineffective. And Alexander Kerensky, who is a socialist, by the way, even before Lenin, there was already a predominance of socialists. Even in the 1905 Russian Revolution, there was a predominance of socialist and socialist Democrats in the Russian Duma. And that was before the Tsar was toppled. So, I think the rise of the communist movement and the communist influence, starting in the former Russian Empire that Peter the Great of the House of Romanov set up, I think that had a very important foundational effect on how the 20th century played out after 1917. So you have Leon Bronstein, Leon Trotsky, who was living in Brooklyn or in the Bronx in New York, and he went through Canada, and then he went to Ireland, and then finally he went on to the Russian Provisional Republic. From there, he was almost arrested at customs by Canadian authorities and not allowed to go to Russia. But at the end of the day, he managed to pull through. There's a lot of people that say that it was because of his Freemasonic affiliations that he was able to do that. Vladimir Lenin Vladimir Ulyanov, or Vladimir Lenin, was in Switzerland when the February Revolution happened. And he went through Germany and Sweden and arrived in Petrograd. The Hungarian Soviet was a fail. Well, it lasted for a very good while. It lasted about 5 months. And it resulted in the bloodshed and killing of a lot of people. Anyway, I have to go to work. See you later. See you later, man. God bless. You have a good day. So yeah, the Russian provisional government was even less effective as a state organ than the Russian Empire was, because it stopped censorship of the press, it allowed open, free elections, which never took place, and it promised a constitution. And already you have all of these different people in the Caucasus Mountains, separate Caucasian republics, as well as the Poles, the Estonians, the Latvians, Lithuanians, the Finns, the Ugrians, the Tatars, the Udmurts, the Kamolks, and a lot of these other people that were under the rule of the Russian Empire that break away. Various Buddhist and Muslim and different Orthodox Christian peoples breaking away from the provisional government. And then there's also many different crises that break out that almost result in the foundation of a Soviet government. There is the April and the June crisis, and then there is a attempt by the army to take over the government that fails. And then the working class of Russia, under the guise and the motivation of the Bolsheviks, take power and overthrow the provisional government in Petrograd in October. And the result is that the Russian Socialist Soviet Republic is created. So now there are 2 Russian states. There is a Russian state in the Urals, or a Russian state in the Urals, that's under the rule of a naval admiral by the name of Alexander Kolchak, and he's leading the White Forces. There's also Dunigan on the Black Sea area, Pieter Dunigan, and there's several other Cossacks. The Don and other different Cossacks are always anti-Soviet and pro-Eastern Orthodox, and they're always fighting the Red Army. Then on the other side, you have the Russian Socialist Soviet Republic, and they're controlled by Vladimir Lenin and by Sverdlov, and they are the first premiers of the Communist Party in Russia. And they're leading the Red Forces. So you have the Russian Civil War that is one of the side effects of World War I. Another thing that happens is that after 125 years, Poland is an independent country again. So in the 1790s, the Austrians, the Russians, and the Prussians divided up the Polish state, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, and Finland get their independence. Now, with the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans, they took Constantinople in 1453. Basically, all of the Ottoman Empire is carved up and divided up by the colonial powers in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the Balfour Declaration that promises the Zionists a homeland in Israel, and then after World War I, a treaty that is signed, I think it's the Treaty of Sèvres or Sèvres, that leads to the carve-up of Anatolia. So The core of Anatolia becomes part of Ataturk's Republic of Turkey, which is a one-party dictatorship, and the caliphate and the monarchy is gone. The rest of the former Ottoman Empire is divided up into Palestine, Trans-Syria, Transjordan, Syria and Transjordan, Palestine, and so forth, Sinai, and will become Saudi Arabia after the Saudis take over in Arabia and create Saudi Arabia and start selling their oil to the West. With Austria-Hungary, the Habsburgs try to set up a federation of equal principalities or states. That doesn't work out, and the Czechoslovaks and the Yugoslavs break free. Hungary, like 3-4 said, Hungary falls under a democratic republic, and then it falls under a Soviet counselor's republic, which is the Hungarian Soviet Republic, run by the Commissars. And then Admiral Horthy invades and takes over Hungary with Romanian support and sets up the Kingdom of Hungary. And it becomes a regency. In the case of the Free State of the Croats, the Serbs, and the Slovenes, they join with Montenegro and Serbia and create Yugoslavia, which is always going to be a royal dictatorship. Czechoslovakia, which also controls Transcarpathian Ukraine, which was under the control of the Habsburgs, they create Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia is effectively a rump state. It is a completely, absolutely meaningless rump state that breaks away from Austria. And it's the only multi-party democracy in Eastern Europe. Italy gains a lot out of World War I, but the Italians are very dissatisfied. The Italians take over South Tyrol from the Habsburgs, and they create the Greater Kingdom of Italy. There's actually a bit of an anti-war movement in Italy because of the socialist influence. Italy's a poor country, but it does very well in World War I, and there is a very strong nationalism in Italy because of the war. Italy is able to get the Ionian Islands and Libya. It gets South Tyrol, and it gets Trieste and some areas in the Adriatic Sea. And Italy gets some other territories and stuff. But the Italians are left very disenchanted by the Versailles Treaty. And more, there is a former socialist and sort of this kind of former socio-anarchist by the name of Benito Mussolini, who was a war correspondent in Italy, and then he became a soldier in the war. And there is these paramilitary units called the Arditi, and those people, they suffered heavy casualties for the Italian side in the First World War, and they become the vanguard of the Black Shirts. And Benito Mussolini, who was actually very anti-war and socialist, became a very strong nationalist, and he set up the fascist movement. So the fascist party is set up in Italy, and in 1921, Mussolini and the Black Shirts march into Rome, and the King of Italy basically consents to letting Mussolini run the country. He also sets up the Lateran Pact with the Vatican that turns the Vatican into an independent state in 1929. So another thing, too, that Mussolini does, he makes a war against the mafia in Sicily. He almost basically destroys the mafia. And so because of that, and because of the strong support of the Catholic Church, Mussolini's able to gain a lot of power. Now, in the case of Austria, Austria becomes a landlocked rump state, and it becomes a republic, but compared to Hungary, it retains a pretty stable government, but it basically becomes run by a social Christian Democrat party, which actually kind of already had power in Austria before World War I. They just basically set up a republic. It isn't really that much of a difference in government. Germany, too, doesn't really have that radical change of a government. It basically is just run by the Catholic Center Party from the Rhineland and by the Social Democrats, who already existed in the time of the Kaiser or in the imperial times, and they just basically continue and form a coalition in Weimar, and that's how the Weimar Republic is set up. So all of the different state Lutheran and Catholic churches in Germany lose power. All of the different monarchies and the different princes that were retained by Bismarck and Wilhelm I are overthrown in either palace coups, or they resign themselves, or they're overthrown by the Spartacists. So there is this kind of German Menshevik party that's called the Spartacists. They are communists, but they're Mensheviks mostly, and they are not able to actually successfully get the German working class together and actually create a proletarian movement. And because of that, and because of a division of ideology, they're not able to really take power and form a socialist republic except in Bavaria and in Kiel, where the sailors' mutiny began that started the German Revolution, and a few port cities and Berlin. It's still enough of a revolution to overthrow the Kaiser and the Hohenzollern dynasty in Prussia and the rest of Germany, and to disestablish the different Lutheran and Catholic churches and separate them from the state and create a secularized, democratic, multi-party republic. But it's not enough of a revolution to actually turn Germany into a communist state. But for the remainder of the Weimar period, Germany is going to be on a constant edge of falling under communism. The Weimar Republic was not really a very stable government. It was very weak and very pacifist and degenerate, but it was a lot more stable than, say, the government in Estonia or the government in Hungary or the governments in Greece and Italy. It was much more stable than those governments, but it was less stable than France or Britain. It was about the same as Finland. Germany's interwar period is similar to Finland's, in the sense that it's primarily a left-leaning government that has something of a nationalist and pro-state undertone. But in reality, Germany never actually becomes a fully fledged democracy as such, but it also never falls under any particular ideology during the Weimar period. But Germany has a lot of issues with an economic meltdown and inflation. The German economy, because of that Spartacist communist revolution and civil war between the Freikorps and the Spartacist League, its economy has a meltdown, and it actually kind of starts to decline significantly. By the early 1920s, there is a problem in Germany with hyperinflation, and the fact that Germany signed the Versailles Treaty and had to demilitarize and basically denationalize the entire Rhineland and turn it into almost a completely separate rump state from the base of the rest of the country itself. They're basically broke. I wouldn't say that it's completely broke, but I would say that the country is basically in ruins after World War I. And there is something of an occupation. It's not like the occupation after World War II, where all of Germany is completely broken up into different zones by different Allied powers. Only the western central part of Germany is directly occupied, but it is still a complete sore in the eyes of the Germans. It's still a direct blow to the German Empire after World War I. The Americans, the Belgians, the French, a lot of the French, the British, and the Luxembourgish people all go into the Rhineland and occupy the Rhineland in different occupation zones. And there is an attempt to basically completely demilitarize and denationalize Germany and prevent it from ever being able to wage war ever again. So Germany is a completely defeated nation. It is not completely occupied. And one of the reasons why the World War I allies do not completely occupy Germany is because they assume that a democratic government is going to take over and stop this kind of militaristic Prussian system. But of course, that's not what happens. So Germany loses Silesia to the Poles, and there's actually a war between the Poles and the Germans in Silesia. It is referred to as the Silesian Uprisings, and it almost triggers a war between Germany and Poland, the Weimar Republic and the restored Polish Republic. And there is atrocities committed on both sides, but ultimately, Upper Silesia goes to Poland, and Lower Silesia stays in Germany. There is the Polish corridor that breaks off East Prussia and Königsberg from the rest of Germany, and that's done purposefully together with the Free City of Danzig, which is under the League of Nations mandate, to try and weaken the state of Prussia. Prussia is considered the leading state that unified Germany and is therefore considered the most militarist and the most nationalist and authoritarian part of Germany. And so it's generally thought that breaking Prussia up and weakening Prussia as a state will stop Germany from having a military system that wants to bring that country into war. But like I said before, the British Empire and the French, because of their defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, and a lot of the international monetary cabal that ran these countries, were very envious of Germany's success after it unified. There is a lot of jealousy by the Anglo-Saxon countries at the large amount of success that Germany was able to make, and just the gigantic inroads that the Germans were able to do. And because of that, and because of a fear that Germany would become the dominant power in Europe, there was always going to be a backlash by the British at trying to demilitarize Germany, either through peaceful means or through war. And so they chose war in 1914, and like 10 to 15 million people were killed, and then it led to a mass of revolutions at the end of that war, and basically it created a lot of problems in the 20th century. For one thing, there is now the movement of communism that becomes a major player in the world. And I'll get more into that in just a moment. So, the Central Powers are pretty much erased. Europe was, with the exception of France and Switzerland, completely monarchy, or monarchist. It was entirely monarchist, and the different little churches, especially in Germany and Austria, were state-run churches. Like, the Lutheran and the Calvinist churches were the dominant state churches, and the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant parish church system. And after World War I, those state parish churches and monarchies are gone. In Germany, in Austria, and in the Balkans and stuff, and it's really just a mess. The Ottoman Empire is gone forever, although it's kind of coming back as of late with the new leader of Turkey, but that's a completely different story. But anyways, Europe after World War I is a bunch of very weak rump states, and they're purposefully put there by the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Saint-Germain to try and prevent any kind of single land power from taking over. And the French always complain about this Anglo-Saxonism or racial Anglo-Saxonism of the British and the Americans, in that because of this Anglo-Saxonism, they go soft on Germany. So the French are mad at the British and the Americans because David Lloyd George and Woodrow Wilson do not want to punish the Germans after the end of World War I, and the French want to completely occupy and invade Germany, including Berlin, and completely destroy the country and stuff out of revenge. It's not, they just don't want to take back Alsace and Lorraine. They want complete revenge. And the British and the Americans say no to this, of course. And so there's a lot of Belgian and French anger and hatred. And at the same time, there is a lot of hostility between the Poles and the Germans. And there is a lot of hostility between the Czechs and the Slovaks, and the Croats and the Serbs and the Slovenes, and the Greeks with the Turks, and the Bosniaks, and Romanians and Bulgarians. World War I really does cause a lot of fratricidal and interfrictional infighting with all of these different ethnic groups, especially in the Balkans. And you're going to see that in the 1990s with the Yugoslav wars and the like. Hold on a second. I'm trying to run a straight. You break this stuff down better than professors I've had. Thanks, buddy. All right, so I think that that's basically sort of the breakdown of what's going on between the wars. I would personally say that it's actually worse than it was before 1914. I think that the nationalist and kind of the militaristic aspects got even worser than was the case before 1914. The Great War really did lead to a lot of the foundations of the modern world that we have now. It really did lead to a lot of the contemporary right-wing and left-wing politics, especially in Europe. The political agenda and the political party scheme in America goes back to the 1800s. And so it's actually older in America than it is in Europe. The European multi-party thing only goes back to World War I and after. But one of the things that I have noticed about after World War I... Would you shut up?
Sure, I'll be glad to.
Yeah, it would help a lot.
Do you want me to stay and help you in the morning, or you want me to go on?
I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say about that. But women... I've always found women to be fucking disgusting. But anyways, I think that one of the primary consequences of World War I is that the ruling classes, or the people in control or in power in positions of leadership, have to make a lot of concessions to the ruling majority. Before World War I, you don't really see a lot of an appeal to popularity or to personality cults or to this kind of popular appeal of the masses. I mean, not even in democratic regimes of the 19th century you don't see that. But with World War I and the results of that conflict, this completely changes, and you actually see a complete change or a complete momentum towards the ruling classes, especially in democratic countries, giving concession and giving a lot of conceit to the masses that are being ruled, in the sense that they fear a communist revolution or a militaristic ideological overthrow and change of power. And so as a result of that fear, and this becomes especially strong during the Cold War. And, you know, there's the Red Scare in the United States, there's the Red Scare in Britain and the United States about the Bolsheviks and Bolshevism and all this other crap that happens during the Russian Revolution, to where there's a lot of concessions that are given. You see the beginning of the welfare state in the interwar period, especially in Sweden. Okay, now think about it. You know, why is it that right by the 1930s in Sweden you have the beginning of the consent of having a welfare state, or a so-called people's free society, or people's social welfare society, where the government is giving everyone money, is giving everyone benefits and free health care, state-endorsed health care, better vacations and better paid holidays, better paying holidays, better work hours, you know, the 8-hour work day and the 5-day work week. That is very popular at this time. You know, you have the progressive movement in the United States, and that's very central and important to what's going on. So you have, after World War I in the 1920s and 30s, you have a lot of mass appeal from leaders and people that are trying to utilize their personality and their rhetorical ability, their oratory ability, to appeal the masses. And they do that in fear of an opposition party leading a revolution with radicals and overthrowing the government. And for a long time, there's a lot of fear about communist takeover in America, in Britain and stuff. A lot of these kind of fears that you see become popular during the Cold War era, they have their origins after World War I with the first Red Scare. So, I think that the biggest consequence of World War I is the division and breakup of the Middle East into these different artificial secular states that generate a rise in extreme radicalism, and also the rise and the insurgence of international communism with the Third Internationale. So I want to go back to Russia at this point, and I want to talk about the Russian Civil War. So the problem with the white forces is they were completely interdivided, and too divided against themselves. They were divided within themselves. Some of them were ultra-monarchist, some of them were kind of sort of democratic or pro-democratic. Others were what you would term as being proto-fascist. But the problem being is that they were too divided, and the only thing that joined them together was anti-communism, and that's why they lost. And so with the defeat of the white forces and the victory of the Red Army, you have a very new type of government in the world, which is the Soviet Union. It starts off, of course, as the Russian Socialist Federated Soviet Republic, but together with the Belarusian, Ukrainian, and Caucasian Socialist Soviet Republics, they create the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1922. And they try to lead the Internationale, or the momentum of international communism. There are attempts in Poland, Hungary, Germany, and Italy and Spain of creating communist governments, but they're overthrown and it's stopped. The reactionaries and the nationalists succeed in preventing these very weak and feeble communist regimes. They're a lot like the Paris Commune in 1871, but they actually succeed in stopping these communist republics from taking shape. So after that, communism goes to the Far East. There is a Japanese and a Korean Communist Party. Several different East Asian Communist parties and Latin American Communist parties take shape during this time, around the time of the 1910s, early 1920s. And also you have the beginning of anti-colonialism. So we are getting into what we could consider to be the modern contemporary world, with the end of European dominance and the effective beginning of anti-colonialism in the interwar period. So a lot of the anti-imperialist, anti-European, anti-nationalist movements that want Africa and Asia to be freed of European colonialism, they have their start around this time. Communism also goes into China, and of course you see the warlord period in China, where China is effectively not a non-existent as a state. So that's important as well. With Dr. Sun Yat-sen, or Dr. Sun Yat-sen. So, yeah, these are the results of the First World War. I would say that America takes over Britain economically, has the dominant world power at this stage. But in 1921, Britain still has the largest colonial empire in the world. Britain comes out of World War I fairly well economically, but it loses an entire generation. Also, there is a breakdown of kind of this almost one-party system in Britain, and this kind of where only 40% of all working age males are able to vote. So there is finally universal suffrage in Great Britain. And so from 1832 to 1918, there is passage of several reform laws to where by 1927, Britain is a total universal democracy. Even women and virtually all men of age are able to vote. Also, women get the vote in the United States. And America begins to go down a pathway where it becomes a very popularist type of democracy. Also, the origins of the civil rights movement, or the modern civil rights movement, you see the genesis of that after World War I. Really before World War I, but the interwar period where you have Marcus Garvey and who was that guy that talked about the colored races or whatever? The rise of the NAACP. And Marcus Garvey and a lot of these kind of black nationalist types and stuff. So the aftermath of World War I is basically a complete revolt against 19th century Western civilization. And the communist revolutionary movement and the reaction of that, which is fascism. Fascism, in a way, is a complete and total reaction to communism. It starts with Mussolini in Italy, and it works its way to Germany with Hitler, and in Spain with Francisco Franco. All throughout the 1920s and early 30s, Germany is effectively almost in a state of complete civil war and anarchy, where you have a very weak and feeble government that doesn't really do anything on the surface, and underneath that you have an inflationary government or an inflationary economy and a war going on between communists and the National Socialists. And that's something that's going to continue right down until Hitler comes to power in 1933 and actually brings this anarchy to an end and establish the Third Reich. So Europe is in a pretty weak and feeble state after World War I. An entire generation is effectively lost, and there is a lot of problems and issues that are not resolved by the Treaty of Versailles. A lot of governments go into debt. Even the victorious nations like Great Britain, Belgium, and France and Italy fall into a lot of deep debt, and they end up buying bonds from the United States to pay off some of these debts. And what happens, and what you see happening with the Great Depression, is they're not able to pay these debts. And what they actually end up doing is they mirror the Soviet Union, and they just curtail the debts. They follow what Lenin did in the Soviet Union, and they just end the state debt. They just completely abandon paying back their debt. And Nazi Germany is the last of these countries to give up paying back all of these debts. So there's a lot of problems and issues with paying back of debt by these different governments. There is a lot of constant transition in government between arch conservatives or nationalists and sort of the social democrat kind of united front socialists or Democrats with the Labour Party in Britain, or with the Tories or the Conservative Party. Another thing that also happens before I end this is in the 18th and the 19th century, you have this sort of old school liberalism, this kind of Gladstonian liberalism and Jacksonian democracy kind of classical liberalism from the Enlightenment. And around the beginning of the 20th century, and especially by this time, that starts to die out. And it's replaced with more of the social gospel and more of a social liberal kind of mindset. So the old school classical empire liberalism is fading out. It largely dies out. And so on that note, that's going to be the end of my lecture of the geopolitics of post-World War I. Third Force says, Warhammer, let's go. I drank 6 beers and some wine and drank them a bit fast. The Hungarian Soviet was a fail. Yes, well, it resulted in a Red Terror, and it killed thousands and thousands of people. And then there was a subsequent White Terror, where a lot of the reactionaries killed and murdered a bunch of communists. So it was actually a very unstable civil war. Anyway, I have to go to work. See you later. 07, Reinhard Hadrig 07, Burger Boy says, thanks for doing this historical info stream, Hammer. I look forward to listening to it later. They are your best streams and very cool. You're welcome, bro. You're definitely much better company to have around than Retardos MC, aka the Sus Corner. It's not the Kino Corner, but it's the Sus Corner. And his name is not Euros, but it's Retardos MC, because he's a Satanist. Richard Murdoch, what about the Mongolian hordes? Are you talking about Mongolia? Well, the Mongolia is ruled by the white general, by a white army Russian general, forgot his name, and then the Soviets go in there and they establish the Mongolian Soviet Republic, or the Mongolian People's Republic. And then Mongolia is communist until the 1990s. Reinhard Heydrich, you break this stuff down better than professors I've had. You're welcome. Richard Murdoch enjoyed the stream. Yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I don't know when I'll do another one of these, but yeah. Forge Gang!